Hello everyone. I filmed the bulk of this video a few nights ago, and I did so without a script. As a result, some of the things I may have said off the top of my head may have come across as massive generalizations, which was not at all my intent. So I wanted to clarify a few things up front. Firstly, by no means did I mean to suggest that anyone who didn't like Lost or its ending simply didn't understand it. That's not what I meant to suggest. There are undoubtedly people out there that followed the show as closely as I did over the 6 seasons that it aired, yet still walked away unsatisfied. This video is not at all meant to dismiss those opinions as invalid. It is intended purely to address what I see as a massive disparity between the very negative perception people who have never seen Lost have of the show versus the overwhelmingly positive reception everyone I've ever shared the show with has had. Ultimately, I hope this video might convince at least one person out there who hasn't watched Lost to give it a chance, despite the negative things they may have heard about it. Lost is a story about human beings. Nearly every time the audience forms an opinion about a character, the story then challenges that opinion by showing us things from said character's perspective. This lesson, that even the most unlikable people that we have to deal with in everyday life may have a story that paints their behavior in a different light, is as valuable today as it's ever been. If we can remember to look past our own limited points of view and make the effort to empathize with those that we encounter and to consider their alternative perspectives, the world would be a much better place. In my opinion, Lost teaches that lesson more masterfully than perhaps any other story I've ever encountered. As for the mysteries the show introduces, over the past decade, several clickbait articles and videos have made a habit of accusing Lost of not bothering to address or solve these mysteries. Then they tend to proceed by reciting a long list of so-called unanswered questions, almost all of which were actually answered over the course of the series, oftentimes more than once. This notion that Lost left its most pressing questions unanswered is exactly what I started this channel to attempt to dispel. My Getting Lost series of videos on this channel attempt to demonstrate just how unfounded this claim is. Does the show sometimes ask the audience to put the pieces together themselves? Absolutely. But personally, I find this to be part of the fun. Not to mention, I find it far more satisfying, realistic, and compelling than being spoon-fed the answers. It's simply more organic storytelling than having a character monologue detailed explanations for what's been going on. So that's my very vague recommendation of Lost and what I like about it. Obviously, I want to avoid spoilers in case anybody watches this video and knows absolutely nothing about the show, as unlikely as that might be. But yeah, bottom line, I cannot recommend this show enough. I love it. I'm not saying it's perfect. It has its flaws. I have my own criticisms of certain areas of it. But there is no other show, no other story that I love the way I love Lost, that I enjoy discussing as much as I enjoy discussing Lost. No other show or story has shaped me as a person the way that Lost has. And I know I'm not alone in expressing that sentiment. So with my recommendation out of the way, let's get into why I believe Lost has the reputation it has and why I believe it shouldn't. Hello. So I'm going to try and do this video without a script, which will pretty much be a first for me, and hopefully it won't be too much of an editing nightmare or worse, a viewing nightmare. But for a while now, I've been wanting to make a video that talks about the reputation that Lost has, specifically its ending, and how that reputation's kind of grown over the years, and why I feel that that reputation is not earned, and why I feel like if Lost had aired maybe 5 to 10 years later than it did. Even if it was the exact same show, I don't think that it would have gotten the reputation that it has. And there are a lot of misconceptions about this show, and again, specifically the ending, that I just really want to talk about why I think that happened. But I'm going to do it without getting into spoilers, because ultimately what I would like this video to be is something that Lost fans can show people they know that are hesitant to watch the show because of this reputation. So yeah, I won't be getting into the specifics of the plot. So if you're worried about that, don't. So I'd like to start with one of the more common misconceptions, which is that J.J. Abrams is in any way responsible for what the show ended up being. And I don't just mean that in the sense that he doesn't deserve credit. I also mean it in that any faults that people find with the show, I've seen people giving J.J. Abrams a hard time, even though he had nothing to do with the show at that point. The bottom line is he doesn't deserve blame or credit for the later seasons of the show. When ABC first decided they wanted to make this series, they brought J.J. Abrams on board because of his work on Alias. He then reached out to Damon Lindelof, and together they ended up creating what we now know as the pilot. And for the first several episodes, I think 11, they did work on the show together. But then at that point, Tom Cruise had approached J.J. Abrams, also because of his work in Alias, to direct Mission Impossible 3. So at that point, J.J. Abrams left Damon Lindelof to run the show by himself, something Damon Lindelof had never done before. It was also around this point in the creative process that they realized how big a phenomenon this show was actually turning out to be, which Damon Lindelof has done many interviews about how that's not at all what he expected, and the fact that he was now going to be left to run this wildly successful thing by himself, it gave him a lot of anxiety. So what he ended up doing was reaching out to his former boss from the show Nash Bridges, and that would be executive producer Carlton Cuse. Lindelof brought him on board to help him run the show. And from that point forward, we're talking about mid-season 1, up until the very end of the series, those two, Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, ran Lost together. They were co-showrunners. But what the unexpected success meant was that the series was going to be a lot longer than they initially envisioned it, which meant things that maybe were intended to be revealed fairly quickly, they suddenly had to start pacing themselves. They didn't know how long the show was going to go on. With the show being such a massive hit, ABC obviously wanted it to keep going. And without knowing how much longer the show needed to go on, they had to take their time revealing a lot of things. Now here's where I think the timing of when Lost aired comes into play. Back in 2004 when it started, there were no streaming services. There was no watching the episode online the next day. TV seasons being released on DVD was a fairly new phenomenon, and even when that happened, it was months after the season had ended. My point is, if you missed an episode during those first 2 seasons, you missed it. You either didn't watch the next episode because you hadn't seen the last one, or you watched the next one trying to figure out, what you missed, trying to fill in the gaps as best you could. Now, that kind of changed at the very end of season 2 when ABC.com started putting the episodes online. So if you missed it, then that following few weeks, that episode would be online and you could watch it. But that was like a brand new thing at the time. That was like the first I personally had ever heard of anything like that. I remember when they announced it, like how exciting that was, because I talked about this in my intro video when I first started this channel. If I missed an episode in the first 2 seasons, and that happened a fair amount, I would have to I was in high school at the time, I'd have to go to school, get on the internet, and track down a transcript that somebody had put online and just read what had happened in that episode. And that was the only way I could stay up to date on it without, falling behind. So yeah, when they started putting the episodes on ABC.com, that was a big deal. And like I said, it was a game changer. I feel like Lost broke ground in that way. Anyways, so that happened at the end of season 2, which was in May of 2006. The show then went on hiatus and came back in October of 2006 when it was announced that only 6 episodes would air before, at the beginning of November, it would then go on another hiatus until February of 2007, at which point it would return with like 16 episodes, one every week for 16 weeks straight. Now, to wait over 4 months for the show to come back, and you get the season 3 premiere, 1 episode, then you wait a week, you get another episode, and then another week, you get it. And to then only get 6, and then have to wait another nearly 3 months. All the people that I know that watched the show but then fell off of it, almost all of them, this is where it happened. At this point, the show had been airing for over 2 years. Plenty of the mysteries, certainly had it been explained fully, it was easy to get the impression that they were just making it up as they were going along. The answers were never coming. And even if you didn't feel that way, the constant waiting, the 42 minutes a week at most that you were getting. I obviously didn't give up on the show, but looking back on it, I really can understand why so many people did. But the thing that happened right after this point where all these people gave up on the show, was that the showrunners, Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse, they sat down with ABC and they explained that they really needed to know how many episodes they had left to work with. And they asked for an end date, and basically they worked it out to where, okay, after season 3 ends, we're going to do 3 more seasons, 16 episodes each. So basically 48 episodes left total. And as a result, about 10 episodes into season 3 is where, in my honest opinion, the show hits its streak. It knows what it's doing. For the most part, you can tell that there's been a change, that there is no more dragging their feet, if you will. Now, I imagine a lot of people would hear that and be like, well, sure, but you're telling me I got to watch 2.5 seasons of them stalling and dragging their feet before the show really kicks off? To which I say, no, that's the thing. It only felt that way, like they were dragging their feet, because of all this time between episodes. When you binge the show, when you watch a couple episodes one night, and then a couple nights later you watch a few more, you don't feel that way. It feels like it's all part of a story. Okay, so that's why a lot of people left the show right before it got really good, in my opinion. But what does that have to do with the ending? So May 2010 is when the series finale was going to air. And a lot of these people that dropped off of the show 3 years prior, or however long each of them did, a lot of them decided that they wanted to tune in for the series finale and see what was going on the whole time. Let's see what explanations there were, and let me use that as some kind of gauge to decide whether or not I was right to stop watching the show. Now, I'm against the very idea of this just as someone that values storytelling, but in this specific case, there are a lot of problems with that logic. Not the least of which is that any answers that these people might have been looking for were not saved for the series finale. The writers didn't say, hey, we're going to keep all this stuff a secret until the very last episode, and then we're going to reveal it all in these last 2 hours. The series finale is not about answers. It's about closing off the story. It's about ending it and wrapping everything up. Furthermore, the one reveal, if you will, that is in the series finale pertains specifically to the final season and what was happening in that season alone. So if you were someone that hadn't watched the final season and only came for that last episode, it was really easy to completely misinterpret what it was you were seeing. And so a lot of people walked away from that, from only watching that last episode, thinking, oh, so this is what was going on the whole time in the show. And wow, that's really dumb. And I'm so glad I stopped watching. It's tragic that those people walked away with this misconception. Because, you know, it turned them off the show forever. Now in this world where you can binge watch Lost, you have all these ways to do it. They never will, because they, in their mind, think, oh, well, it was a stupid show with the stupid explanation for what was going on. And yeah, I'm not going to waste my time. And that's sad, because they really might get something out of it, like I did, like every person I've ever shown the show to has gotten something out of it. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that a lot of these people that ended up with this misconception, they decided to share that misconception with others. If someone talked about wanting to watch the show or, you know, thinking about starting it, a lot of these people would be like, hey, don't waste your time. The ending's really dumb. Or, you know, this is what was going on. Isn't that stupid? I saw it happen a lot. And this is where I actually get kind of aggravated, because from there, it's not just tragic. It's not tragic that someone chose to stop watching the show and then chose to watch the last episode without context, and thus, as a consequence, had a misinterpretation of what was going on. All of that, it sucks, but hey, you know, that person, you know, chose to do that, and that's fine. But when they start talking about it without context and making, you know, and telling people not to watch it, people that I genuinely believe would get something out of watching the show, that's where it becomes a problem for me. That's where I start to feel like somebody is in the wrong. The show ended about 10 and a half years ago, and since that time, I have gotten nearly a dozen people to watch the show. And almost all of them, I've watched it with them. And I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I say that each and every one of them loved the show and loved the ending. I have had the conversation each of these times that, hey, people really didn't like this ending, and apparently this ending wasn't for everyone. And each time each of these people finished the show, they didn't understand why. And when I would point out, oh, well, they thought this is what was going on. Like, oh, what? They're surprised, like I was surprised to find out that, oh, people thought this is how Lost ended, when that's not how Lost ended. Now, look, am I trying to say that there was no one that watched every episode of the show and then watched that ending and didn't like it? Or that watched the ending and didn't also misinterpret it? No, I'm not saying that. But in my experience, that group of people tended to be the type that only watched each episode when it aired. Then there would be months in between seasons, and they wouldn't go back and refresh their memories on what exactly had happened before. So basically, you're talking about, you watch the first episode, 6 years later, you watch the last episode, and you've just been watching it in little pieces over these 6 years, it's perfectly understandable that you might misread things. Whereas today, with all 6 seasons being available to watch at your own pace, I just don't think that would happen nearly as much. Anyways, obviously opinions are subjective, and I'm not promising that you're going to love it and love the ending. I'm just saying that in my experience, almost everyone does, and the reputation that Lost has for having one of the worst endings in TV history, it doesn't add up. It honestly deserves a better reputation, in my opinion. And I honestly believe that the more people that give it a chance, or that go back to it, that gave up on it back in the day, even the people that came back and watched that finale and misunderstood it, unfortunately, there are certain things that might be ruined for you. But I really feel like if you revisit it, you go back and you rewatch the whole thing, I think you will be pleasantly surprised at what actually was going on and at how good and fitting the finale actually was. And that's the point of me making this video, is I just, there are a lot of people that are missing out on this show for no legitimate reason. It just the reputation that it has that it didn't earn. Like I said at the beginning, if it had come out in the last 5 years, where you could watch a season in a weekend, I don't think it would have developed the reputation that it developed back in 2010. So if you've ever thought about watching the show, but have decided not to, or if you're on the fence about watching it, or if you've never even thought about watching it, but somehow ended up watching this video, please give it a shot. I really think nearly all of you will probably at least enjoy it, if not love it. I've actually been planning on making this video for a while. What finally got me to sit down and film it is Screen Junkies released an honest trailer for Lost a few days ago. Now, I enjoy their honest trailers. I've watched most of them. If they did an honest trailer on a movie that I have seen, or a show that I've seen, I've watched it. And I tend to enjoy them. And I didn't hate the Lost one. That said, there were a lot of things that they said in there that were misconceptions, that weren't accurate, even on a factual level. I'm not trying to bash Screen Junkies. I mean, they release an on trailer every week. You're talking about a 6-season show. I don't expect them to have watched the show in depth before doing their thing. It's an unfortunate circumstance where a lot of people that might have watched the show over the past 10 years but didn't because of the reputation will then feel reassured somehow that, oh, good thing I never watched that show. It sounds dumb or whatever. So I guess this is my attempt at my honest trailer. Without spoilers, it's me being honest about what I think the show is and me trying to promote it to anyone that might see this. So alright, I think I'm done ranting about this. If you somehow stumbled upon this video but have actually already seen Lost, I do a series of videos on this channel called Getting Lost, where I go into the various answers and explanations that are in the show but are kind of subtle. A lot of it is my own personal interpretation of certain things and my own personal theories and headcanon. But I'd like to think that those are somewhat entertaining to the people that have been watching them. So yeah, maybe check those out if you feel like it. I don't really know how to sign this thing off, so I guess bye. Oh, that's my Nala. There's my Nala. Trying to be on the YouTube. Now to Tina. Say hi, Tina. Say hi to the YouTube.